Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here representing Jason Blaha Strength and Fitness, and today I want to chat with you guys and gals a little bit about how for most people compound movements are just best use to their exercise economy. But a quick reminder, if you guys will please click like down below, be greatly appreciated. If you're not following or subscribed, please do so, and if you'd be kind enough to drop me a comment down below, I would appreciate that so much. But let's get over into this topic. Again, I used to say this a long time ago, then I've gone through my own phase of doing lots of bodybuilding stuff, lots of isolation work. I've messed with it, I've programmed it, I've coached it. And quite frankly, I feel realistically when I've checked and looked, I mean, I've gotten leaner since back then, but I can't say that it did that much for me, in terms of even developing those areas, my personal experience. And I know plenty of guys are similar. And I'm not saying no one should ever do isolation movements. I'm not saying if you got a weak link and you feel that it needs isolation that you shouldn't do it. I want to be extremely clear. Let me state that up front. I am not saying that. And I'm not saying if you're like, hey man, I just feel like my shoulders need a little more work. I got a few minutes. I'm going to do 2 to 3 sets of lateral raises here at the end of my workout. Nothing. There's absolutely not a single thing in the world wrong with that. Okay. Understanding that 99% of people out there, 99.9 who work out, are not trying to win bodybuilding shows, or not trying to bring out that last plane and angle when they're shredded to the bone in a bodybuilding competition or something. So we do need to be clear on that point. Those things absolutely have their context. There's absolutely going to come a point where someone trying to, win a physique competition is probably going to need to step back and go, man, did my posterior delt get enough isolation work? The soleus of my calves get enough isolation work? And realistically, when you're at that level doing something like that, yeah, those things have their place because you're now competing for perfection. And you're competing against other people where you're going to be judged on those particular weak links, and those judges are looking for that 1/4 of an inch of difference. Like, they're literally looking for it. But realistically, for most people out there who just want to be jacked, have a good physique, be healthy, be fit, this really is not the concern. And we do have to understand that. It's the average person is not going to notice how much rear delt work you did. And that's what I'm saying. The average person sees you shirtless or in a tank top or anything else. Not one person in the world anywhere is going to notice that extra 1/8 inch of rear delt that you spent years and years building and isolating. And that's kind of the point I'm making there. So we need to be clear that's the point I'm making. So when it comes to exercise economy, you look at the data, you look at the real world. There's plenty of people who do nothing but big compounds. They're big, strong, jacked people. If they get lean, they have great physiques on top of it. In fact, we've seen plenty of really jacked power lifters just go get lean, and then all of a sudden they look like a bodybuilder. They may not have the perfect proportions and stuff that, say, a champion bodybuilder would have, but to the average person walking down the street or the average new lifter can't tell. Okay, so that's what we need to understand. A lot of this minor fine-tuning that people are doing, these points of nuance, normal untrained eye is not going to see it on you. They're just not going to see it. It's going to be completely unnoticeable. And so when we start talking about the amount of work that people will put into these things, it can be a lot. In the case in point for me, trying to bring the biceps up, that we're lagging from whatever, it wasn't just an extra 5 minutes every week. It was an hour, oftentimes dedicating a whole hour of my life every week just isolating biceps. Okay? And really didn't make any difference in the grand scheme of things. Even I pushed progressive overload every angle, plane. It's caused inflammation for me, and I can say that at this point. So that's the thing to think about with a lot of isolation work. It does create more inflammation, and I think people forget that. There is, well, big movements are going to hurt you. Are you sure about that? I don't think that they do. Especially when their volumes are moderated. No, big movements are less likely to cause overuse due to the load being distributed across multiple joints, multiple tendons. There being more variation set to set. In other words, unless you were perfectly lining everything else up, you're probably getting a little less overuse of the identical movement patterns. And they're also more natural movement patterns. So realistically, you have that. But then it comes down to exercise economy. In other words, people say, yeah, but it takes a little longer to set big lifts. Well, not when you're in shape. You'd be shocked. I don't warm up for weighted dips. I'm just throwing that out there. I've already done other work. I just throw the plates on and go over and start doing them. So not really as much setup as people really seem to think, other than loading plates. But realistically, stop and think for a moment. If you came in for a workout and you did 3 sets of squats, 3 sets of dips, 3 sets of weighted pull-ups, right? 3 sets of all those challenging, hard work sets. How much muscle growth did you stimulate? A lot. That's with 9 sets. Now, realistically, can you do that in 30 minutes? Ooh. If you're efficient, can you come in and do 3 really hard sets of back squats, weighted dips, weighted pull-ups inside of 30 minutes? If you're really honest with yourself, people are like, yeah, of course. How much muscle growth did you stimulate? A lot. Now, I'm not saying everything's going to be perfectly proportioned, but every single muscle in your body is going to grow to some extent from that. You will, if they were challenging hard sets with progressive overload, there's not a single muscle in your body that isn't going to get some growth stimulus and training stimulus from that. Pretty much everything. So that's what we mean by exercise economy. Think about how much muscle gets used in a back squat or a weighted pull-up. It's enormous, absolutely enormous amounts of muscle in terms of percentage of your body versus the smaller exercises of how little gets stimulated. And we see that in the studies. Like, people forget that this has been looked at too, in research, and they find that big muscles on average, like big movements, whether it's a bench or whatever, or a row or a pull-up, the total muscle growth in the given muscles, even though it may not hit every head perfectly, is just as high as isolation when it's measured. Except you're spanning it across multiple muscles. And I get it takes a lot of work maybe to set up all the plates on a deadlift, but realistically, a bench, a weighted pull-up, a weighted dip, some of these bigger movements, it's not a lot of setup. You just come over and do them. Okay? And that's the point. They're an extremely good use of your exercise economy time. You stimulate a huge amount of muscle, huge amount of adaptation, huge amount of calorie afterburn per every single exercise that you do when you do mostly big movements. And I'm not saying that you can't come in and do a few lateral raises to failure at the end if you got the time and you feel that the area needs it. No one is saying that. Simply talking about making good use of your time. And that's the topic at hand. That is what we're talking about. Good use of your exercise time, your training economy, keeping overuse down, and just getting more fitness and everything out of it.